The relegation race is back on. Nottingham Forest were just deducted 4 points, and it looks like Everton will face further punishment as well. Now, I have a lot of thoughts on these two clubs facing punishment, thoughts that would include me talking about Man City and Chelsea, but let's push those aside for later in the video. Right now, I want to look at the league table, because with these changes, we can re examine a relegation battle where a gap had kind of started to form. I think this change gives a lot of clubs a glimmer of hope. So, I want to talk about every club in the relegation race. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to be assuming that Everton receive a 4 point deduction, or I guess a 10 point deduction, but it could easily be 6/12. With that out of the way, let's start at the bottom. Sheffield United. The Blades are currently 8 points from safety. Well, 7, but basically 8 because their goal difference is so bad. But I do think with these points deductions, they do have a bit of hope. 8 points in 10 games isn't impossible, and they do have a somewhat easy stretch of games to finish the season, including matches against Everton and Forest themselves. So I would be feeling a bit more hope if I was a United fan, but let's be honest, Sheffield United has been terrible this season, and I really can't see them even getting 7 points in their next 10 games, let alone being able to catch Everton or Forest or Luton. So, with that, I really see them going down. Burnley. Burnley are 5 points from safety. Well, again, four, but terrible goal difference. But there's a lot more reasons to be excited than with Sheffield United. First of all, Burnley are in pretty good form. They just drew West Ham and beat Brentford in their last two games. 4 points from their last two games. That's pretty good. And in addition, they don't have a particularly difficult run of fixtures coming up. I'm especially looking at that April 6th game against Everton as a potential turnaround for them in a relegation battle. But with that being said, like Sheffield United, it's hard to see it happening. Burnley hasn't looked like a Premier League team this season. Even when you go into their 4 points from their last two games, you'll see that they blew a 2-0 lead against West Ham, and they only beat Brentford because they went down to 10 men after 8 minutes. I will say that their underlying numbers are slightly better than Luton Town, but this late in the season, I don't think it really matters. We see the trends that have played out on the field. Now, I do think they have slightly more hope than Sheffield United, and if they beat Everton, I'll really start paying attention to their relegation battle, but I don't see Burnley surviving. Luton Town. Now things start to get interesting. Luton Town is currently 1 point above Nottingham Forest, and per my guess, will be 1 point ahead of Everton. And they are slightly below in goal difference, but that gap is bridgeable, unlike with Burnley or Sheffield United. Now, you could say with Luton that they've been worse than Nottingham Forest and worse than Everton all season long, so them having 1 point advantage this late in the season doesn't really mean anything. And I think it's a good point, but it does overlook two things. First of all, Luton have improved a lot over the course of the season. They've started finding goals and they've been stealing points late. Their demolition of Brighton is a good example of how this is a completely different side from the one that entered the Premier League. The second point is team morale. Luton Town just got the news that they're out of the relegation zone, ahead of Nottingham Forest, a team they just tied. They should have all the belief in the world. And then you look at Forest and Everton, and especially for their players, they just had the hard earned points that they had that should have kept them up taken away. And now there's an air of uncertainty looming over their clubs, especially with the appeals that could drag out till beyond the season ends. Some things are in Luton's favor. I will say for that, though, that morale could shift kind of quickly. In Luton Town's next two games, they're facing Tottenham and Arsenal. It is kind of likely that they'll get 0 points from that time, and if Nottingham Forest and Everton are able to get ahead of them, maybe that morale flips. Also, Luton is less talented than Everton or Nottingham Forest. They've done a great job to punch above their weight this season, but Luton have been heavily reliant on set pieces and late goals as of late, and that's something that's not easily replicated. And in terms of expected goals, which I did mention you have to throw out, but it seems like I should mention it, they're worse than Burnley, and there's a big gap between Burnley and the 17th place team in the league. I think it's going to be tough for them to stay ahead of both Forest and Everton this season. It's going to be difficult for them, but Luton have pulled off some magic this season, and to be honest, they've already surpassed my expectations, so let's see what they can do. Brentford. Brentford have been weird this season. If you looked at an expected goals table early on in the year, you'd think that Brentford would be competing for Champions League spots, but nope, they underperformed their expected goals so badly they got dragged to a relegation battle. Now, I thought that Ivan Toney returning would help them start putting some of those goals in the back of the net, but that didn't happen either. And now Brentford only sit 4 points above Luton Town, 5 above Nottingham Forest and where I expect Everton to be. But thankfully for them, they are one of the most well-managed clubs in the division and are not facing a financial crisis and have not received points deductions. All the Bees have to do is stay above one of Luton Town, Everton, or Nottingham Forest. And I think that's perfectly reasonable for a team with Ivan Toney up top. And on paper, Brentford do have a more talented team than all the teams below them. They even have some good relegation battle experience with the likes of Ben Mee and Nathan Collins at the back. I find it very hard to see Brentford going down, but they still have a lot of work to do. And if they don't start picking up points quick, they could be in trouble. Crystal Palace. Now that I'm talking about the relegation battle more, I get to talk about my club a lot. It's great. Crystal Palace are currently 8 points clear of the relegation zone and have been playing better since he appointed Oliver Glasner as manager. We have a game against Nottingham Forest this Saturday, and if Palace win, I think they have no more fears of relegation. Not technically mathematically safe, but if they beat Forest this weekend, I think all their relegation fears are gone. However, if they lose, it's back to that relegation scrap. However, even if that happens, I'm not too concerned about Palace, and that's because they're getting healthier. Eze is already back, Michael Olise is nearing his return, and Gahey should be back before the end of the season as well. With those players coming back, Crystal Palace has a ton of players who are able to single-handedly win games. With Elise, with Eze on the field, even if it gets to a big relegation scrap, I can see one of those players just being able to make something magic happen. And I don't see it coming down to the final day or anything for Crystal Palace. I think with the gap that they have over the relegation zone right now, with the talent that they have, with their getting healthier, I can't see Crystal Palace getting relegated. That being said, they still have to execute, which is something they failed to do against Luton Town, but I think my club will be able to survive. And Oliver Glasner will get a full summer to get some work in. In summary, for the clubs around the relegation zone who are affected by Nottingham Forest and Everton's points deductions, Sheffield United, a little bit more hope, but not really. Burnley probably have a bit more to be excited about, but it's still going to be really tough for them. Luton Town, great news. They have a path to stay up now, but it's still going to be difficult. Brentford, a lot of relief there because they've been bad this season, but they should be able to stay up now that those points deductions have happened. And same thing with Crystal Palace. With that out of the way, let's get into the two offenders. Nottingham Forest. Starting with Forest, since their punishment is actually known, or at least until appeal, Forest are currently in the relegation zone, 1 point behind Luton Town, and assuming Everton gets deducted 4 points, behind the Toffees on goal difference. Now, Forest do have a pretty winnable run of games coming up. I mentioned that Crystal Palace game earlier. I'm very nervous about it. And that is good because Forest have been in terrible form. They only have one win in their last 9 games. And other than 2 wins with the new manager bounce under Nuno Espirito Santo, it's looked like the same team as what Steve Cooper had early in the season. And despite the amount of money that Forest spent, the money that got them into this predicament in the first place, I'd be hard pressed to name any standout players in this Forest squad. I guess Morgan Gibbs White, but honestly, he kind of confuses me as a player. Like, I still struggle to get a read on that guy. But it's not like this is a completely untalented team, especially in the midfield and attacking areas. This is a Premier League team, in my opinion. However, the defense has been bad this season. They did upgrade on goalkeeper, but that doesn't mean much when you didn't improve the defense at all. But granted, given their financial state, it's going to be tough to improve anything around this team. I think they are a more talented team than Luton Town. However, with a potential lack of morale and with how good Luton Town has been as of late, it's going to be tough for Nottingham Forest to stay up. Everton. Everton are only in a relegation battle because of the points deductions. That much is clear. However, it's also clear that Everton has been in terrible form this calendar year. No Premier League wins in all of 2024. And they are taking that horrible form, adding a loss of morale from receiving another points deduction, and you're putting them in 17th, maybe 18th place if that points deduction is 6 again instead of 4, like I'm assuming. Things are bad at Goodison right now. Goals aren't happening. Their goal scoring remains a huge issue. The team can look lifeless at times, and they weren't safe at all before this points deduction. I'd still say they were in a relegation battle before this happened, but with another points deduction, it's looking grim. However, there are some positives to talk about. Everton have a positive expected goals number. Again, like with Brentford, it doesn't mean too much this late into the season, but they're 8th in the league in terms of expected goals, and I think that just tells you how much talent is in this team. With Luton and Nottingham Forest, you can point to Ross Barkley, maybe Morgan Gibbs White, and go, those guys are difference makers in the Premier League. But with Everton, there are several. Jared Braithwaite is one of the top young center backs in the Premier League, and his partner, James Tarkowski, has done really well in the Sean Dyche system. Then they have England's number one in goal. Garner and Onana are talents in midfield, and Dominic Calvert-Lewin, now that ship has sailed, he's never rediscovering his form. But the point is, there is talent in this Everton team. They would not be in a relegation battle if not for that points deduction. But despite that, no one's the show for it this year. When I look at Everton, I see the talent, I see the underlying numbers, and I think, no, there's just no way this team goes down. They're too good for that. And I still believe that. But I believe the same thing about Leicester last season. Right now, I see Sheffield United, Burnley, and Nottingham Forest getting relegated. And you're welcome, Nottingham Forest. For me saying that, I just guaranteed you 3 points this weekend. But, well, Sheffield United, Burnley, just not good enough is what it is. With Forest, when I compare them with Everton, I think we've already seen Everton react to getting this points deduction, and they were able to rally and get out of the relegation zone, and I have the belief that they can do it again. Again, with Everton, I have faith in them like I had faith in Leicester last season, but I do believe Everton can do it, and Luton Town has been putting some points together. I think their morale will be sky high. I said that's unlikely, but I could see them getting points against Tottenham and Arsenal coming up. With Nottingham Forest, their form is concerning. I don't see a good talent level like I do with Everton, and I think at the moment they have the hardest path to survival, but it's certainly not guaranteed. They could easily put up a fight and stay up, and Everton and Luton Town definitely aren't safe either. And even Palace and Brentford certainly have a lot of work to do. So that's my thoughts on how the points deductions are affecting the relegation race, assuming Forest doesn't get theirs overturned on appeal and Everton get deducted a further 4 points. However, how do I feel about the idea of the deductions themselves, with Everton, Forest, and Leicester now all getting punished? And a lot of people have been upset about this, I think mainly because of what's going on at the top of the Premier League. With Man City facing, what was it, like 115 violations, and Chelsea being able to spend billions on flops with seemingly no recourse to that. And if they face no punishment, which, I mean, it seems like it's going to be likely, that's a perfectly fair criticism. And even if they do get punished, like, what's it going to be? Like a transfer embargo for Chelsea? Maybe Man City will be deducted 5 points to start the next season. Like, it doesn't mean as much as what it means to clubs like Forest and Everton and Leicester next season if they get promoted. It's something that could really hurt those clubs, while the Big Six, they can kind of just avoid it. It's certainly not fair, and that is a fair criticism of Nottingham Forest and Everton receiving these points deductions. But with that being said, Nottingham Forest and Everton did still break the rules as they are currently stated, and I think they do deserve punishment for that. I mean, if you look at Everton, they've been in a horrible ownership situation for years. HITZ Sevens has a great video on that. I'll link to it in the description if you want to learn more about it. And Nottingham Forest, well, the summer they got promoted, everybody saw what they were doing. We all knew they were overspending, and once Everton got a points deduction, I think we kind of knew this Nottingham Forest one would come too, because it was just crazy the amount of money that they were spending. And because of that, I'm not too disappointed in Nottingham Forest getting a points deduction, especially when you compare them to a club like Brentford, who's on a limited budget, only has so much money to spend. And if Brentford were to go down because Nottingham Forest spent a ton of money on some random players, I think that's a bad thing. That's just having a club being able to be taken over by a billionaire, and that ensures their success. And this has been the financial fair play rules, profit and sustainability rules, that's been trying to curtail that. And if you notice, Newcastle hasn't been good this season. Despite the full backing of, what is it, the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, this is going to be rambly, just deal with it. They still are only in 10th place this season. They've regressed. They weren't able to get out of the Champions League group stage. And even at the top, things have started to get some more parity. Aston Villa are in Champions League places. Brighton are really competing for Europe this season. And some of the top clubs, they don't look as invincible as they did before. I think that a lot of thought behind criticism of financial fair play is that it only benefits the top clubs. And to some extent, it does, because under the rules as they are now, you wouldn't be able to see a rise of a club like Chelsea in the mid 2000s, Man City late 2000s, early 2010s. That can't happen, and Newcastle being in sixth is showing that not happening. I think that eventually they'll probably be able to get up there. They have some money to spend. They should be able to sell players, but at least it's slowing and giving other teams a real chance. And now it is hurting Nottingham Forest. And there are some things that need to change because this is something I talked about earlier, but if you, early a different video, I should say. If you look at the bottom of the Premier League table, it's kind of horrifying to look at because you have Sheffield United. They sold probably their two most talented players. I don't think they tried to stay up this season. Luton Town, they've done a great job with their spending. They've been really smart with it, and they might be able to stay up because of it. But they did not spend like a team that was desperate for survival. And then two other teams in the relegation battle, Everton and Nottingham Forest, they are in points deductions because they spent too much because that was the only way they could survive. And Premier League money means that much to them. And I'd even look at Burnley, and with how much they've invested in young players, they're probably doing that not with the idea to stay up, but the idea of being able to sell those players further down the line for profit. And if they're able to stay up with the talent that they have, great, that's amazing. Maybe they're even looking to get promoted in next season. If they get relegated to the championship, they'll be able to bounce right back up with the talent that they have. But it's really disappointing seeing that at the bottom of the Premier League because if you look at Crystal Palace and Brentford this season, they've both been terrible by their standards. Unlucky with injuries, sure, but Brentford has been bad this season. Crystal Palace has been bad this season. But despite that, by the virtue of being a base Premier League level side and not being in financial ruin, they've been able to stay up, and it's looking like it's probably going to be pretty comfortable. I think that's something that the Premier League definitely needs to address, and the profit and sustainability rules certainly aren't helping it. With that being said, though, Nottingham Forest and Everton did still violate those rules, and I think that they do deserve to be punished for it. But the question is, should the system itself change? And I think that's a deep conversation that we could have. It would probably involve putting some form of salary cap or something. This is already rambling enough, so I'm not going to go too far into it. Not even sure if that would be a good idea. But that being said, thank you for watching. Good to talk about the relegation battle. I think it's a very interesting topic. And the changes that are going to be happening to the Premier League, it's going to be interesting because I don't think things are going to be staying as the way they are for a very long time. Being said, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe. See ya.